Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Material Matters with Grant Gibson. The show has been running for over 6 years now. However, for listeners who might be new to all this, the idea is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. Today I'm talking to Simon Terry. Simon is the brand and marketing director as well as the owner of the iconic lamp company Anglepoise, a product that has genuine claims to iconic status. Initially manufactured in the 1930s by Herbert Terry Sons, over the years the product has been used by the likes of Queen Elizabeth II, David Lloyd George, Picasso, Roald Dahl and Barbara Hepworth, to name just a few. More recently, Terry has collaborated with fashion figures such as Margaret Howell and Paul Smith, as well as writing a design manifesto which talks about the importance of durability and repair. Importantly, the company now offers a lifetime guarantee for all its products. Happily too, it will be showing prominently at this year's Material Matters London, which runs from the 17th to the 20th of September at Space House on the outskirts of Covent Garden, where it will be celebrating the 90th anniversary of the 1227. Simon, thank you so much for doing this. How are you?
My pleasure. I'm doing very well today. Thank you. Yeah, excellent.
Good. Was that intro okay?
Yeah, it's perfect. You know, once you sort of reflect on things like that, it's quite an accolade, and all the lists there, it's quite something. So thank you. It's quite satisfying, quietly and secretly, just how much has been achieved over the years. So thanks for that, Grant. No,
that's a pleasure. Have you had a good summer? I don't know what it's like down where you are at the moment, but we've been lashings of rain today. But did you have a good summer?
Yeah, the sun. Well, it's a sort of mixed blessing for us. For me personally, lovely summer, lovely sunshine. But working in a lighting company, what you really want is a bit of sun. Then you want splashings of rain and storms, because then people are thinking about lighting rather than barbecues. So it's a mixed blessing for me.
So you're looking forward to the autumn, in other words?
I've sort of started doing my rain dance just in case I can bring those, bring the nights in quicker to get the lighting sort of moving.
We have a tradition on this podcast of asking guests to describe their studios and workshops. We're talking over the internet. Where are you today? I'm kind of looking at you on a screen and there are lots of books behind you. So I'm guessing you're not in the workshop.
I'm kind of at home at the moment, actually. So I'm kind of in my my sort of bed sit. I tend to look at it because I have to work in the bedroom. So it's a bit like being a student again when I work back from home.
Let's talk about how Anglepoise is structured.
In terms of main structure, really now, historically, we were very much what I call an extended family business. Lots of family members in the company, going through the generations, and now pretty much I'm the last sort of standing family member in the business, which I think is an interesting one because obviously we talk a lot about a family business, but I think that as well can go two ways, because I think there's some real positives around family businesses, but also there can be some not quite such positives, around sort of, nepotism perhaps, and maybe the wrong person from the family ending up in the wrong job or in the wrong area of a business, I suppose. So yeah, it's a sort of interesting time for me, but very much now the buck rests with me, and it's my job as the custodian of the business to ensure it endures and carries on being part of the sort of British design landscape, which I think it historically is.
I like that word custodian, but I'm kind of interested how many people you employ, because you have a workshop where just outside Portsmouth?
Yeah, so we're based at a place called Denmead. We sort of have a hub there where we've now ditched a lot of warehousing and all that sort of side now has been outsourced. So we've really tried to simplify the business. So it's more of a workshop. It's very close to the woods, so we can go and spot gruffalos in the woods at lunchtime, which is rather nice.
Do you have many gruffalos in the woods?
Well, I kind of make them up to try and get more people to go for walks, because it's quite hard to unstick people from their desks, because I think people love working and feeling busy at desks.
Okay.
But as we all know, the best ideas and all come from when you're on walks or in the shower. Those tend to be the two sort of main places for thought. But yeah, there in the office, we do a lot of prototyping, mending, rewiring. We put together some of the bigger bits of the bigger products there. We do some more specialist pieces there. So it's more now what I'd call a sort of design office. We have a lot of 3D printing tools, which we use not only for prototyping, but also for actually making spares for very old products. So what's quite interesting is using modern technology to deal with very old products, and actually making components that are probably better than they were ever made, which I think is quite interesting. So yeah, a lot of that going on there.
But the bulk of the Anglepoise is made, in China nowadays?
Yeah, so the bulk of the production is there. We make more sort of the larger items like the giants and things that are actually made now in Oxford. Right. So we kind of outsourced that, because actually managing production of anything is very tricky. And I think as a business now, we're having to focus far more on the brand and marketing and the design, I think is the area of focus, it's been a big change in the company. I mean, we used to employ 2,500, back in the old spring making factory. So now we're down to sort of around 20, 22 people. So it's so we really are genuinely a small company. But I suppose with that sort of thing, with the small company with a big name. So I think a lot of people think we're a lot bigger than we are. So the expectations on us are quite high at times. So when you do something well, it's expected of you. And when you do something badly, people go, well, why have you done that? What kind of a company does that? So yeah, it's a mixed blessing.
And when you say when you've done things badly, I'm a journalist, Simon. This is in my contract. Can you give an example of something you've done badly, something you regret?
Oh, Grant, do you want to live through all the regrets and look back,
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
yes,
I do. As a journalist. I don't know. I think it's like anything. The mistakes you make are actually take you on your journey moving forward. So it's learnings. But I think the trick I've learned is to make those mistakes as cheap as possible, because you want to fail often, but cheaply. So I think that's the mistake. So probably if I pull back, when I first started, when I started work with Kenneth, which I'm sure you'll get onto in a bit, we worked on a product that was the Type 3. And I was very much, we can make this all in the UK, very high end and all the rest of it. And then walked into serious supply problems, quality control issues. It was a real baptism of fire for me. But I think the things you really learn from are the things that really hurt you, So I think that was, for me, was a real bashing, probably on my ego, to be frank. And it's probably what I needed to get a reality check. Expensive in many ways, because we fell out a lot of supply chain, but then it went on to lead to the Type 75. We learned a lot of new skills, and we ended up with an exceptional product that was well priced and hugely successful. So when I say mistakes, I think those lead to opportunities and successes. And I think we've had more successes, I would say, than failures, which is why we're still here, I suppose, to fight another day.
Well, we'll probably concentrate more on the successes as the interview goes on, but it's always good to talk about a failure. I was watching a TEDx talk that you gave a few years ago in Winchester. In it, you said that every morning you use a spring, presumably one you've manufactured at some point, as a kind of wellness tool. Now, I don't generally ask about people's morning routines on this podcast, but I am intrigued by this one. I mean, is this a ritual you perform every day? What do you do, Simon?
It probably sounds a bit strange, but I have one. I actually have it downstairs, because I do it by the door. But every time I leave the house, I have a key. I use a spring as a key ring. So I have my work keys one side and I have my home keys the other. And what I do is use it like a miniature chest expander, I suppose, or a finger expander. And I open and close the spring, because actually it's quite a special spring. It has a special characteristic. And there's a feel to it. It's a bit like, I suppose, the spinny top in Inception. It's these sort of objects, and you connect. And I just sort of breathe with it a couple of times, and I just think about my great grandfather and the legacy I come from, and it just helps ground me for the day. It just sets me up, and so I don't walk out the door in a fluster. I walk out the door calmly, and that just sets the tone for me for the day. So. Yeah, it may sound a bit strange for people, but I just find it very calming, and I really enjoy connecting with those that have gone before me. It gives me a sense of purpose and a sense of, a sense of purpose I'm very happy to do. I'm very lucky and fortunate to have this opportunity. So, and I never forget how privileged I am for that.
So it's a ritual, basically, every day.
It's a ritual I do. It's become a habit now. I think it's like all things. If you do little small things often, they build into big habit-forming things. And I think that little habits are important.
I'm going to get on to the nitty-gritty of this because this is a blatant plug, frankly. You're going to be exhibiting at Material Matters London this year, which runs from the 17th to the 20th of September at Space House during the London Design Festival. You're celebrating the anniversary of the 1227, designed by George Carwardine. What are you going to be doing? How are you celebrating?
Well, to me, it's the 90th anniversary of that product. We're going to go all out and turn it into a whole festival of celebration because, to me, I think being British, we're so bad at celebrating. We kind of just don't do it. And we kind of view nothing we do as good enough. We kind of have that inbuilt into us. So for me, this is all out. We're just going to celebrate and have a festival. So we're doing a number of things. So one thing we're doing is we're relaunching a product which we've stripped right back to a raw finish. It's got a burgundy braided cable. It's got brass components. And that really is about stripping it right back to 90 years and looking, just taking a moment to pause, because I think that's important. When you've got a great design, it's a pausing moment. It's also very automotive as well in its kind of look, which I think is reflective of George Carwardine, the inventor of the Anglepoise, because he was a car suspension engineer. So there's something quite nice. So that's one thing. We're doing a collaboration with Penguin Random House, who's also 90 years old. And we're doing 4 giant lights with 4 different artists and illustrators that we're going to start auctioning, like a sort of online auction, which will launch at Material Matters. For that, we're actually launching it on the first day of the show, which is fantastic. And all the proceeds with that will go to the Roald Dahl Museum and Story Centre, because we have a long history with them. And the giant light was actually first done and designed by my father, actually, and was done for the Roald Dahl Museum in Great Missenden, because Roald Dahl has he always had an Anglepoise in his writing den. So we're doing that, which never balanced, actually. So because he changed the lamp holder, so it had a flannel over it and a sellotape and a golf ball hanging off it, which it still does in the museum to this day.
Okay.
It's sort of quirky Roald Dahl. So we're doing that. We've got a big student project with students from Wales, from Swansea. I always get this wrong.
So University of Wales, Trinity St David's, Swansea College of Art.
Grant, you should be interviewing for me. Brilliant.
I have it in front of me. It's amazing.
It's just incredible. So that's showcasing the students' work there, which for me is lovely, because that's about the grassroots of design and not just looking back 90 years, but thinking ahead 90 years. What's the future of materials? So that will look at surface finish, but also materials as well. Hence why Material Matters, it all fits the materials. And then the final one we're doing is we're taking it to the 90th logo, and we've got Portsmouth students, animation students doing a whole sort of animation around it, which I love things like that, because I like taking something iconic and very important to us and just saying, let's just play with it and get creative, because it's all about creativity. It's all about the doers for us. What is a world without creativity? And that is my background. So that's what we're doing.
Very good. You talk about wanting to look forward. I am going to take you back, if that's okay, because the 1227 wasn't Carwardine's first lamp, I don't think. I mean, as a bit of background, he started, as you suggested, in the car industry, and the lamp was developed from a car suspension system rather than inspired by the action of a human arm, which is a kind of myth that's grown up around the product and was certainly on the Design Museum's website for quite a long time. I mean, his first lamp was initially called the Equipoise, which was launched in 1932. Can we talk about the physics of the product? How did that initial Equipoise work, and how does the Anglepoise work?
Well, basically the Equipoise was what then became the 4-spring Anglepoise. So it was 2 separate systems that work, and it keeps a parallel movement when you move it. But he came up with a very, at the time there was nothing like it. But it was also not designed initially as a light. He literally designed it as a method of balancing a weight in space. So it was a pure piece of mechanical engineering. Then I think he actually had the eureka moment of what can I stick on the end? And it was suddenly, I can stick a light bulb on the end. Literally, ta-da, light bulb moment. And you'll since have, I'm sure you've got one of these lovely microphone holders that's on an Anglepoise arm. We even had telephone holders. They were the original hands-free telephone holders we used to make, actually, with this product years ago. But the way it actually works is, you use the word there, equipoise. That is actually, the spring is an equipoising spring, which means it has, most springs have what I call a logarithmic characteristic. So if you look at a slinky spring, the more you pull it, the kind of tougher it gets. With an equipoise spring, it doesn't. It's just as tough when it's closed as when you open the coils, because it uses initial tension, which is when you make the spring, you literally deflect it off a mandrel and twist material itself. So it's actually a very complicated, tricky thing to do, which is where we came in with George Carwardine, because it's Terry's, the old family business. We were experts at springs and spring making.
Herbert Terry Sons was the family business.
That's correct, yeah.
Based in Redditch in the Midlands. So how did you and Carwardine get together?
Well, he basically came to us because we were, the expert spring makers. He needed some quite clever springs, and we were the people that could make those springs to those specifications. And then it was Charles at the time, who's my great grandfather, who looked at it and thought, we can sell more springs. This is great for us. So he licensed the design and proceeded to sell a lot of springs, and sold a lot of lights. So that's how it all began, really.
Presumably, if you're a spring company and, Charles, your great-grandfather, suddenly wants to make a lamp, that must have required a lot of retooling, would it not?
It's a certain number of tooling, but at the time they were very productive business. A lot of what they did was called novelty works, which they would do. They had thousands of products in their catalogue, everything from car valve springs to even things like tennis racket holders for your bicycle or rifle holders for your bicycle. They even made toilet roll holders. So anything that was to do with metals and pressings, they did. And also in Redditch, you have to remember at the time, Redditch was like the world making place for fish hooks and needles. So it was a very famous place. And it was, you come to a showroom in Redditch and it literally was a pond where you go and test your fishing hooks, in the pond. It was kind of like that, but the industry with the output of that industry. They loved the challenge. And I think they were incredibly innovative at the time with metal and springs and what you could do. They had a big R&D department. Because it was pretty much, I think, the biggest factory in Redditch at the time, one of the biggest in Birmingham, because factories at that time weren't that big, not like they are today, where they're huge. 35, 40,000 people is quite normal in a lot of factories.
Do you have a sense of what Carwardine was like as a person, as a designer? I mean, did he even see himself as a designer? I guess he probably was an engineer, really.
Yeah, I think if you think about, a lot of the things he did, so he filed a lot of patents for all different things. And, he would have, I think he was just really interested in the maths and the engineering of things. He was a pure engineer who loved getting in with the, working out and calculating some quite complex calculations. And I think that's very different from what a designer would do. And I think the original Anglepoise, and even if you look on to the 1227, it wasn't really designed as such, because it's a classic, form follows function type thing. It's more similar to a Formula One car than anything. There is nothing superfluous in that design except a few cues like square base, which references Art Deco cues. And I think that was done just more merely sort of looking what was about town at the time and deciding, well, we need to style it a bit to make it fit in, because we're, kind of at the back end of Art Deco period. But if you look at it in the lighting books, in terms of product design, you get a lot of Tiffany lamps and a few Bauhaus, quite simple forms. And suddenly you get this crane with springs. I mean, it was just such a weird product that has gone on to become much loved, I think, because it's so sort of human and anthropomorphic, and it has a personality. But to your point earlier, this is not based on the human arm. It's based on pure mathematical principles, which I think for him, he'd have probably found it hard for people to say it was based on the art, because to him, it's not. It's mechanical.
In your book, Springlight, his son is interviewed and is very keen to stress it has nothing to do with the human arm.
Yeah, and I think that is, it wasn't looking at the human arm and say, we've got to mirror that, which is probably how a designer would think. This came from the suspension, the science, and the product. The eureka moment came from that. This was not invented to become a light. It just became like a post feature that we can use it as a light, flexible light. That's how it was designed.
And am I correct in saying that initially Carwardine saw it as a working lamp? It wasn't meant for the home.
Yeah, absolutely. It went through many iterations, even in its 4-spring format. So it started life as the 1208. I think it was a black version. He had a chrome 1209, because it just went up. The companies had a numbering system for every product. So it just went up a number, whatever it was. And it was used a lot for machinists' light. So you could position it over the metalworking, but also a lot in drawing offices, where you could reach far distances, and dry the ink as well. With the heat from the bulb, you could put the shade right down. And, if you look back, actually, these lights were all sold as energy saving lights, back in the 30s, because it basically, when you put light right over what you need to, you only needed 25 watt bulbs. If you had it from the ceiling, you needed 100 watt bulbs. So it was a really effective way of, if you put the light exactly where it's needed. And I think probably historically people would use Anglepoise a lot closer to the work than people do today, because the light bulbs have got far more efficient again. But yeah, it was far more industrial. And then, you get on to the sort of 1227, which is the 3-spring light, which was which was designed with George Carwardine and Terry's to be a more domestic version. I was always told, because ladies would get their hair stuck in the top springs on the other thing, which is clearly not true at all. But there were all sorts of rumors.
It was a different time.
It was a different time, and it was designed for the ladies' boudoir and all this kind of stuff. So a lot of the advertising is hilarious, because these are still quite mechanical things. But obviously now the aesthetic is a lot more industrial, has pulled into the domestic world. So even a 4-spring Anglepoise works in an interior now, because it's the barriers between industrial and domestic have kind of blended so much that it works.
Oh, absolutely. The 1227 and those initial lights, according to the book that Jonathan Glancy wrote, the notion was that anybody could afford this lamp. He uses the example of a bus driver could afford it.
When these lamps first started life, though, they were very expensive items, because they were very over-engineered. So what you'll get is, for example, an Anglepoise would be the same price as like a Burberry trench coat back when they first started. Then I think over time, gradually price would be taken out of the product to make it more affordable. Which again is different than how most product designs are done today, because you do a product design, then you don't change it. The Anglepoise evolves and is changed a little more like a motor car, probably. It was trying to, and that's what happened, I think, a lot with the products. They were just designed to make them cheaper and cheaper so you could sell more, and that's the kind of way it went for many years with the design. So you get plastic components coming in, nylon components over time, and some very strange stuff, to be honest. I mean, changing some areas of the lamp where you really shouldn't, because it starts to impact the function of it. So, and then the 1227, I think, was made for so long. It was made all the way up to nearly 1970s, where clearly it would have looked very dated at that time. And then they switched to the Model 75. It's more of a fluted kind of shade shape, where they realized they had to change the design because it was just so out of keeping with the interiors of the time.
Yeah. I mean, I guess on the question of sales, I guess one of the more intriguing elements of Anglepoise's history was the way that Terry's essentially handed the US market to a Scandinavian manufacturer. I mean, it's a Luxo product that became Pixar's famous logo, for example. How did that happen?
Well, basically at the time, the family was so, I think, fixated on, making more springs. I think the company probably viewed themselves more and more as a component maker in many ways. And what I don't think they realised with the Anglepoise is that they created this whole new territory, which really was around the task light, because I think using springs is such an effective way of making a very flexible system. I mean, you can do it with weights and things, but it's very efficient. It's a very effective way. And the forespring today is probably the most copied domestic product in existence. I mean, there's millions and millions of copies of the forespring. But I think at the time, they just didn't see the opportunity. So they were I think Jakobsen from Luxo saw some of these products on some machine tools that went over to Scandinavia and thought, oh, these are interesting, quirky looking things. I'd like those for the Scandinavian market. So Terry's then licensed a design for him to do that. I think it was in 1936 or 38. And then he proceeded to say, well, I'd like to do America now. So they licensed the design for America, which I think was just short-sighted at the time. I think they had focus elsewhere and didn't see the potential shift. I mean, just as the company, we made an incredible amount of exercise machine stuff. We were probably one of the first home exercise companies. We built everything from rowing machines, chest expanders, all the little grips for your wrist grips are all Terry's. So they were just very innovative, but sometimes maybe not making good business decisions.
Hope you're enjoying the show. This is to remind you that Material Matters London isn't far away. It runs from the 17th to the 20th of September at Space House, which is on the outskirts of Covent Garden, so it's super, super central. We have a plethora of amazing exhibitors joining us this year, ranging from major brands and organisations such as Anglepoise, who you're listening to, AHEC Europe and Axel Nobel, manufacturers like Domus, Modus and Low Carbon Industrial, and companies you might not know so much about, including Chinese fashion labels Zugzag and Filet Materials from Taiwan. There are features from the likes of Priestman Good, the Material Way, the Wood Awards, the Only Natural Design Competition and Futures Lab, and of course designers and makers who are confounding our expectations when it comes to materials. Look out for the likes of Kinetech, Love Happy, Max Wheels, Knotty Furniture and Wedge, to name just a handful. Not only that, but there'll be a talks programme too, so it's going to be great and it's free for architects and designers, but you must register. For more details, go to our website, materialmatters.design. That's materialmatters.design. So I think it's safe to say that the company had some ups and downs over the years, which you've alluded to. It survived the Second World War, for example, and made 93,000 Anglepoise lamps for military service. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Bomber Harris, head of the RAF Bomber Command, used one. Barnes Wallis, famously, the inventor of the bouncing bomb, he used one. Your father, John, asked you to come into the company at the turn of the century. What state was it in at that point? Because Terry's had been bought some years earlier by ASC, an American company, but John and his cousin Ray bought the rights to the lamp.
Yeah, I mean, basically at that time, it was, the spring making it was getting really hard to make stuff. So they sold the company. I think my father worked for them for a while, didn't like working for someone else. So he bought back with Ray the lighting part, the Anglepoise part, and formed Anglepoise Lighting. So that's what he created. And they did, very well in the sort of 80s period because, there wasn't a lot of competition. I'd say in the UK market, not like there is today. So, and they made a lot in Redditch, and sold a lot to the kind of office wholesale catalogues and places like that, and did very well. Then I think it got to the time where, I was around and having the conversation. It was getting much harder. Competition was right. They were still making most of the stuff in Redditch still, UK manufacturing. And I think my father had just, was getting tired and thinking, well, it's time to call it a day. But I know you're not interested because you've got your own career in the film industry. And, I sort of went, I don't know about that. I was sort of a new challenge. Let's see what happens.
So what was your background, Simon? Because you came from the film industry. What were you doing there?
My background really is I studied art college. I studied things like visual performance. So I was very sort of artistic. And I then started sort of doing adverts and video, TV production. Then I got into tape to film. So I worked a lot on adverts for cinemas, sort of conversion. Then I got into visual effects for the film industry and worked on a lot of Bond films, Nutty Professor, Mask of Zorro. I worked with some brilliant films with some brilliant people.
Which Bond movies were you involved with?
The one I did was The World Is Not Enough was the main one. Okay. I sort of did.
Brosnan era.
Yeah, his era. And I actually did the sequence where he puts on the X-ray glasses and everyone sort of goes see-through and you can see the guns in the casino. And that was my... It didn't get any better than that because then I had to work on a thing called The Jesus Story, which was Russian state wax model animation. And they hadn't used gloves and the wax models were melting and we had to correct the whole thing, which was the low point of my film career. So I went from the highs. But actually the team, what it taught me was amazing sense of teamwork. And, you know, that the people I worked with were brilliant and they went on to win an Oscar and a BAFTA for Inception. So, you know, it really taught me a lot about how to behave, how to respect the tea lady in terms of filmmaking, security guards, all that sort of stuff. It made me quite humble. So I was very creative, and that's where I came in initially. In Anglepoise was what can I do with the archive, and looking at the past. And so my father got quite ill, and I was suddenly sort of thrown into a role, you know, of running a business where I had no experience at all and was completely out of my depth. I think if I'm honest looking back, but put a brave face on it when I was younger and sort of had a lot of energy. I don't think I could do it today. I wouldn't have the energy, but it was a lovely opportunity. And then, you know, I read an article in the archive. It was the Guardian Style Outsider, I think from 1968 or 70s. And it was written by a gentleman called Kenneth Grange, who was asked about his favourite design of all time. And he talked about the Anglepoise being this minor miracle of balance, and balance is a quality in life we don't appreciate as we should. It appeals to young and old. And I had that just moment where I stopped, hairs in the back of the neck, stood up and went, this is it. This guy understands what this lamp is, what it means. And I sought him out in London and the rest was history, you know.
We'll talk about Kenneth in a minute, but I want to concentrate on you for a bit longer.
Yeah, that's fine.
It wasn't a given then that you'd work for the family firm. Had it always been in the back of your mind?
Not really, because I'm the youngest. So, you know, the youngest has never really worked in the family business. So it was always the eldest and the youngest would have to sort of clear off and find their own career. So it never was really, but I always loved the lamp. I always felt sort of connected to it growing up because it was everywhere in my life. And it is part of the sort of landscape, you know, the British landscape. We sort of, it's like the phone box or, you know, Concorde or Spitfire. They're all part.
Well, it's on stamps and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of important. And I love that sense of how you can keep something going, how you can keep it relevant. That's something I find very interested. And I'm very sort of proud person. You know, I think I loved this idea of legacy and how you can build things for the future. And, you know, so it appealed to me. It also appealed to me because it's something physical. And I'd come from films which were all digital. You know, we were at the cutting edge of digital technology and we did the film stuff. It really was amazing tech. So it's nice to do something physical and you make with your hands and people appreciate in the way they can only appreciate, you know, physical objects.
And when you arrived, had the company left the Midlands for the South Coast?
No, the company was still based in Redditch, and that's when we had the tough decisions to make a lot of people redundant because it was just losing a lot of money. Just we're making £1 a light, selling them in Argos. It was just not sustainable. Very hard decisions, and I basically moved. Because I wanted to move down south. I'd sort of always been connected to the Isle of Wight and London and all of that sort of thing. So I moved it down and literally didn't take anyone with me. It literally was, we were starting from we call the phrase, we're probably the oldest startup because I literally started with me and one person I recruited, and we started from scratch. The only thing I think we brought down was pretty much a test machine and a couple of items. That was it.
Was that tough? Because presumably there must have been people who'd worked for Anglepoise in Redditch for decades and generations, possibly.
It's incredibly hard. I think that you had people who'd worked there for 29 years, and it was it didn't go down well in the press, or anything else. But businesses have to change. You have to move on, and we're at a point where we had no choice. It was change or just disappear. It was, every business will teach you, sell more of what you got to a wider audience. We had the position where we didn't have the right products and we didn't have the right customers. So it was starting completely from scratch. We also weren't leveraging the power of the brand and the name. And we weren't doing that through the design of the products. So, hence why, the Kenneth connection was, it's all about the product. It doesn't matter how good your packaging is or your advertising. If the product doesn't deliver, you don't have a future as a business, and that's the point people don't realize. The product has to deliver.
Did you know immediately when you walked into the company that you'd have to make seismic changes? Did you know that before you walked in even?
Yeah, I think looking at it, I could tell it had to change because I was coming at it from obviously a very creative background. I was just coming straight out of films and going, well, we've got product placements. I mean, we'd had product placements in Bond films for years. The Anglepoise has been used in Bond films a little bit like the Aston Martin has. It's a handshake and it goes in the film. So, and actually the original 1227 is in the first, it's in GoldenEye. When Q has been introduced to the Aston Martin, our lamps are in that shot, and to me, that is, you can't get more iconic than that from a, automotive kind of the nature of the design. So yeah, it's absolutely essential, that side.
So you bring in Kenneth Grange as design director, obviously one of the all-time great product designers behind the 125 intercity train, Kenwood mixer, Kodak Instamatic camera, iteration of the London taxi, parking meters, Parker pens, you name it, he's basically designed it. Interestingly, his mother worked in a spring factory.
That's correct, yeah. So when I went to find him out, so I heard he was introducing Alice Rawsthorne to the Design Museum at the Design Council, and he was doing the introduction, and I went up to him at the end and said hello, and we just chatted for 3 hours. I mean, it was incredible. At which point he said, yeah, his mother worked in worked springs, and Terry's was the Rolls Royce of springs, to her. And he actually said, her long service award was literally a giant car spring that used to sit by the fireplace when they lived in home, because Kenneth came from very humble northeast London beginnings, and his mother made springs and his father was a policeman, and so there was such a sort of connection there. But I think our sort of coming together was kind of for a reason, because I think Kenneth had done so much design, everything, but his career was kind of like taking a bit of a mid area, I think, where he'd done so much already with Pentagram and with all these designs. It was kind of this perfect meeting of the two of us to sort of come together and do something, because he was far more than just a designer. He was an integral part of the company.
Well, what did he do for the company, Simon?
Well, what he brought was just this incredible sense of the design mindset into the business. So getting us back to understanding how to make product, how to design it, how to build in safeguards in products. So that's what he brought, a kind of an understanding of mass production. He was an all-in, all-out industrial designer. So he really brought that understanding in. A lot of commercial experience, because co-founding Pentagram, the biggest design agency in the world, you have to have very, commercial sense. So we were always very close, and probably most designers just get paid royalties. With Kenneth, he would get a list of everyone we'd sold to, just in case he knew someone or connected. So we had a very open relationship, and he was very involved in the workings of the business for years, because I needed his counsel and and support. And we had a very sort of close relationship, very close friendship.
Can you see parallels between Carwardine and Grange, I wonder?
I think George was just this phenomenal engineer, which I think would probably, his focus was so much on the brilliant engineering that he probably wasn't someone that had to please people or be the center of attention. Whereas I think if you look at someone like Kenneth, he was the ultimate in how to charm people and how to lead people. So, Kenneth, for example, would have the ability, he could draw to you. So you'd be sitting with him and he suddenly start drawing upside down towards you.
Oh, wow.
So,
that's quite cool.
So what that does is massively connect you. George would never have done that. That would just be superfluous. Why would you do that? And I think Kenneth had that ability. And then if he was sort of, he did the Kodak stand, for example, and because he started off in a lot of stand designs, and someone came up to him and said, "Oh, yeah, nice stand. What do you think about the cameras?" And he has the diplomacy not just to go, "Well, they're a bit crap," or "They're this." He said, "Well, interesting, it's this, this, and this." And the person, "Would you like to design a camera for us then? I'm head of Kodak UK." That was kind of thinking. And the third one for me, which I think is this brilliant example of how he would think, was for Ken Wood, when he first met him, he said, "Well, can you design a mixer, food mixer, but you've got a week to build a model and do it?" So he said, "Yeah, I can do that." So what he did was build half a model and then put a mirror behind it to reflect the other half. And it was that fact that impressed Ken Wood, was that ability to think laterally and outside the box, which is why he worked with Ken Wood for years, was that sort of out of the box thinking, which I think would have been very different from George, would be very much the engineering, the science, the going deeper and deeper, whereas Kenneth would be more engaging, Kenneth personally also, he had that ability to make you feel like you were the most important person in the room, but he did it in a way to never make you revere him. He would never let you put him on a pedestal, because he would just do silly things with you. He was always a joker. So the amount of photographs I've had where he's blowing kisses at me, trying to make me laugh in front of the camera, is ridiculous over the years, and leaning over his coffin bookcase. And he was just, this brilliant, fun, Northeast London man, oh boy, he was just brilliant.
We ought to, for listeners who maybe don't know, coffin bookcase probably deserves a little bit of explanation.
Yeah, if you kind of imagine a coffin and a bookcase together, but the bookcase is shaped more like a mummy. So if you imagine a mummy case, but then you've got shelves in it, he had his books in it, and the idea was he would be ultimately buried in it. But that never happened, because April, his lovely wife, saw sense in the end to say, "No, this is not going to happen. This is getting a bit ridiculous."
I interviewed him towards the back end of his life, and he was remarkably sharp utterly charming. One of the things you did, as well as working with Kenneth, was collaborate with the likes of Margaret Howell in 2003, then Paul Smith, both of whom obviously best known for their work in the fashion world. Why those two, and what did they bring to the brand?
Well, I think the first one that came was Margaret Howell, who we've collaborated pretty much from the start, from I think 2003. And that was just, I had a pretty good friend of mine called Spencer Wallace, who did print work, and he just said, "Look, we work with Margaret Howell. I think you should go and have a chat with Joe Barber." And I went in and we just got on really well. And you look at and again, I think the connection for me was saying, how do we link this product into the fashion industry? Because then what you're doing is positioning it differently. You're increasing the perceived value of the product. And obviously for her, the whole mid-century modern look fits. And that's also, I think, what's quite interesting about the Anglepoise. It can take on different periods. It isn't sort of a set date. It kind of evolves, and it tells the story of the changes in fashion. But we got on incredibly well, and that was, and they were really kind to us. Richard around the company was just a lovely, lovely man who was, so kind to us and really helped me, because I was very wet under, I was very sort of inexperienced at the time, but they just wanted to almost see the lamp be successful because they get that sort of thing. It's part of the British landscape and they wanted to see it endure. So that happened. And then the Paul Smith thing was later. That's come out to 10 years, I think. That happened because I saw he was having an exhibition at the Design Museum, and I thought, great, let's do something with Paul. Didn't get anywhere, absolutely nowhere. And I spoke to Kenneth. I said, look, Kenneth, can you speak to Paul? And he said, yeah, I know Paul. I'll have a chat. So the two sirs, because he'd been knighted by then, went off and said, yeah, let's come together. And they met. And I was thinking, how do they do that? Is there some special handshake? And it's not. It's like, hi, Kenneth. Hi, Paul. And Paul was just incredibly commercial, just that ability within a minute to go, well, we can put this color with this color with this color. And he ended up with this very brilliant color by component approach, which tells the stripe story, but in components. And I think it was a really, really clever piece of design and a great example of, for me, always important collaboration. 2 + 2 = 5, in the Radiohead sense of it, that's really important. Otherwise, you're just cashing in and you're doing it to make money, not to build value. And those are two different things, because when you have an iconic design, you've got to keep building value in it and be very bold with it and confident with it. If you're hesitant, you tend to weaken what you do. So you've got to be bold. And that's been, it's a very, very strong collaboration.
And you also worked with Ili Kishimoto, a rather different generation of designer. I mean, it's interesting, I think, because for this anniversary, you've gone down a very different route, working with students. That's deliberate, presumably?
Yeah, I think maybe it's because I'm getting a bit older and I've got young kids. Well, they're not so young, they're getting over. My son's just done his A-levels. But I'm going through a bit of a time of really trying to support, the grassroots. And I think there's a part for me as a custodian that I feel it's a moral obligation to me to support the grassroots of an industry. So I've always kind of done it, and I enjoy the time of young, talented people because they bring a fresh outlook. And I think that's important because when a 90th celebration, you could just do it. It's all about looking back and history. And that's a very dangerous game to play. So for me, the springboard of looking back 90 years is going, all right, how do we look forward 90 years? So that's what this sort of student work is to really give them a platform to showcase their work in a professional environment at Material Matters. This isn't new designers. This is taken into somewhere that's not a student show. It's a professional show because these are professional young people, in my view. I don't see them as students. I see them as talented young people who deserve to be given the opportunity to show their talents and abilities. It's quite simple, really. It's and that's just pure joy for me. And that's what, if all businesses gave back a little bit, the world would be a better place for it. And talent can come through the system, which is what we need. We need these people to come through and to be given opportunities.
And over recent years, you've developed a manifesto. I mean, you buy an Anglepoise nowadays and it's guaranteed for life.
Yeah.
The importance of repair is a vital strand of your strategy.
Yeah.
Why the manifesto?
Well, it's because we did some work around that, but repair has always been at the heart of everything we've done with Anglepoise. So all the way back to the old factory, there was a gentleman called Alf Jenkman who, it was always ask Alf if you wanted something repairing was the statement. And there's a cabinet that was Alf's cabinet that I found in my father's garage, I think in his workshop 10 years ago. I said, what's that? And it had all the numbers painted very badly on the different drawers. And in there, all the spare parts for all products. So this cabinet has become a symbol for us of repair and longevity. And it's now Ask Laws, because Laws has now taken over this mantle of repairing. And we're pretty much we have rewired and repaired, I think, 500 products in the last couple of years. And when people look at that, they think, oh, it's just 500 products. It's like, no, but they're individually sent back. These are people's loves of their lives. They're passed down from, father to son, mother to daughter. These are important things that you can't lose. You're taking on something here that's you've got to be very careful with. You can't just send a replacement. They're irreplaceable. So repair's always been at the heart. We just haven't formalized it. And we've now created spares all the way back to 70-year-old products. We've even created replacement shades for the original Four Springs we've just done. Because I can't stand seeing them go to landfill. I literally have been known to climb into skips and get them out because I find it too upsetting. It generally hurts me. Because when I go and see a lamp in someone's house, I still think it's my lamp. It's sort of bizarre. And I've been told, well, you've sold it. It's not your lamp. Yeah, but I still feel very connected to it because, it's sort of, it's a useful product that should endure, that should be enjoyed. And I think if you look at the way we consume and, we're falling out of love with the things that are useful for us. Because I think as well, there's so many objects today that don't solve a problem and are useless. And actually, we kind of do it to try and make ourselves feel better about ourselves, because I think, it's kind of, what we call the hedonic treadmill. I think people try and get this sense of, buy a new car or whatever it is to feel better about themselves. But actually, over a period of time, you just go back to the normal treadmill line and it hasn't made you feel better. If anything, it's just made you feel unhappier. So, good products, lasting, that you can repair. I think that's what people want really moving forwards. I think people are sad when they can't repair things. I think it's upsetting.
Absolutely. And it's got harder and harder to, certainly from my childhood to now, it's harder and harder to find ways to repair things. But it must have changed the company, hasn't it? You must have more people repairing, making parts than you used to before this lifetime guarantee.
Oh, yeah. Across the company, we've had a whole shift, whether it's in plastic packaging and removing plastics, becoming a B Corp as well, which is, benefit corporation and joining that movement, which to me was always less about the badge, but more about the people you meet in other companies. Because there's a community out there of people that do really care. And for me, it's sort of just coming together to solve things in small ways, because that's what we need to do, And I think the company really gets it. I mean, all the people that work for me love all this. They love all the stories that come back of this product's been mended, and they say it means so much to me. I'm passing it on to my son or daughter. It makes you feel good, And yes, they're inanimate objects, but some people call them names. They have names for them. They name their lamps. They're very important to them. And I love the fact, brands and successful brands and long-term brands don't just exist by selling the next thing. Of course, we have to have that as part of what we do, but also the longer we can keep old products going for, the stronger it is for our brand, and the more connected we are with the people we serve. And that's important.
Earlier on, and indeed in that TED talk that I referred to earlier, you described yourself as a custodian rather than an owner. What's the difference between the two?
To me, it's a big difference, because to me, a custodian is somebody that, it's a bit like in the words of the All Blacks, it's leaving the shirt in a better place. That's fundamental to them as a team. Or seeing, planting trees you don't see grow into full trees, or starting, you start to build cathedrals that won't be finished for 250 years. It's a way of leaving things in a better place than you found them. And that to me is, it's putting good into the world. It's paying forwards. It's just doing things for the right reasons. And it's thinking about things of not financial value, but value that then to me becomes values and purpose, which is the real driver of any good business. So, but someone that's an owner to me is someone, it's very much about possession. It's about taking away. It's about not giving back. It's about controlling. And you kind of reflect on those worlds and look at the world today. A lot of the world is about ownership and not custodian, because you can't really own anything anyway, can you? What can we actually own? We can't take anything with us. We don't really own the planet or anything on it. So let's just work with it and just be more human. I think that's the part for me, is just find the people you want to work with and do interesting things together.
So as a custodian, Simon, your son, you're just mentioning, just done his A-levels. Will he be joining the company?
I don't know. I think that's a question he's going to work out. Interestingly, he's done his A-levels were in, he did graphic design, product design and business. So there's kind of a thing there. But I have to say, for me, I went off and did my own career. And I think that's so important to go and do something. If I'd have joined the family business straight off the bat out of university, I think it'd have been hard. But because I've chosen to do it, I've really, I never regretted any of it at all. The good and the bad, because there's bad days in it. There's tough times and there's good times. But you have to have both of those things to make it meaningful and purposeful. Anything of value is like that. It's hard. There's high barriers to entry. There's big dips to anything that's worthwhile. If it's easy, it's not worthwhile. It's kind of boring, and everyone will be doing it. So that's what's lovely about this, is always challenging yourself. I think that's important.
We're coming to the end of our time, sadly. So we're into that final question. You have Material Matters London coming up with the 90th anniversary. Talked a lot about thinking about the future. In a nutshell, what's next for Anglepoise?
Well, I think obviously I've talked a lot about this moment of 90th of just pausing and celebrating. And I think that's a really important part. We've also lost, Kenneth passed away last year, 95 years old. He was working, I think, a couple of weeks before he passed away. He was still working on products. So we still have products we haven't launched of his that we will still honor and do, because that's what's important. But for me, so much of my thinking now is around materials and systems, the two areas I'm totally focused on, because those are the things that will change things. Most of the great designs have already been designed. It's just how we make them last longer, have more longevity, have a purpose, and just, really start to work together to solve the huge issues, because at the end of the day, they're design issues and ready to be solved. And I'm very positive about the future, because there's a real opportunity here for this community I'm part of, the whole design industry, to actually say, let's stop just designing the next fancy looking thing for the front page of a magazine, and actually let's design something for 150 years ahead, for unborn generations, or because what we're doing now will influence them in 150 years. So let's start solving the problems and making decisions based on those criteria.
Very good. So the future is materials and systems. Materials
and systems for me.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Simon, thank you so much for your time. Thoroughly enjoyed that.
Thanks, Grant. Loved it.
To find out more about Simon and Anglepoise, go to anglepoise.com. You can go to our website, materialmatters.design, to hear other podcasts I've done, to sign up to our newsletter, and to find out all about Material Matters London, which runs from the 17th to 20th of September at Space House. For all the latest news and to see who's exhibiting, go to our Instagram page, which is also materialmatters.design. And remember, the fair is free for architects and designers, but you must register in advance. One more thing. It would make me incredibly happy if you went to my Patreon page and made a pledge at patreon.com/Material Matters. For as little as £3.50 a month, you can receive invites to various Material Matters events, as well as getting access to each episode before it's published to the wider world. Material Matters is a completely independent concern, and any help you can offer would be hugely appreciated. Ultimately, you'll be helping to take the message, the importance of materials, skill, craft, and design to a whole new audience. Thanks very much for listening.